He said men like him didn't belong in that uniform. What happened next didn't just silence the courtyard. It shook a war hero to his core. Before we begin, if this kind of story moves you, please subscribe to Guard Royals. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us keep sharing powerful stories like this. Now, back to that cold November morning. The gates of Buckingham Palace stood tall beneath a grey London sky. Tourists buzzed with excitement, snapping photos, sipping hot coffee, pointing at the iconic red tunics of the Queen's Guard. And then, there he was. Lucas Bennet, broad-shouldered, silent, unshakable. His dark skin gleamed beneath the towering bearskin cap. His uniform was spotless, his gaze unwavering. Lucas didn't just wear tradition, he embodied it. Born to a Jamaican nurse and a U.S. Marine, he was raised with discipline, shaped by service. From basic training to Afghanistan, from Sandhurst to this sacred post, Lucas had earned his place. But not everyone believed that. That morning, a retired British colonel, Matthew Harrow, approached. Decorated, respected, old school. And when he laid eyes on Lucas, he said something that made the crowd freeze. "Stay with us until the end," because Lucas's quiet response didn't just change one man's mind. It reminded an entire generation what true dignity looks like. Colonel Harrow didn't whisper. He projected, as if still standing on a parade ground from decades past. "In my day, Guardsmen had pride, lineage. This is theater." Tourists nearby began to slow down, sensing the tension in his voice. Phones lowered, smiles faded. Harrow stepped closer to Lucas, his shoes clicking sharply against the wet stone. He circled the guard like a drill sergeant inspecting an unworthy recruit. His words grew louder, sharper, less about tradition, more about resentment. "We didn't hand these posts to just anyone. There were standards, bloodlines, history." Lucas didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed forward, every fiber of muscle trained for moments like this, not of combat, but of control. "Men like him," Harrow said to a nearby group of American tourists, "used to clean boots, not wear them polished." A woman holding her son's hand turned away, disturbed. A veteran in the crowd whispered to his wife, "This isn't right." But Harrow wasn't done. He stepped inside Lucas's boundary, closer than protocol allowed. "Stand down, that's an order, from a superior officer." Lucas didn't move. Not a breath, not a twitch. It was a test, a provocation designed to break resolve. And yet, Lucas remained as unshakable as the stone under his boots. What happened next would shift the entire mood of the palace grounds and deliver a truth Harrow was never prepared to hear. Harrow's final command echoed through the courtyard like a slap in the face. "Stand down. That's a direct order." The old veteran stood chest to chest with Lucas now, eyes burning with a fury that had nothing to do with military decorum and everything to do with pride. Prejudice. Fear of a world that no longer looked like the one he once controlled. Lucas didn't budge. The tourists, once scattered and casual, had formed a quiet semicircle around them. Cameras were lifted again, not for snapshots, but for documentation. Something real was happening here, and no one dared interrupt. Colonel Harrow sneered. Then, in an act so shocking, it cut the air, he spat, right next to Lucas's polished boot. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Jesus." A child asked, "Mom, is he allowed to do that?" The mother, shaking her head, held her child closer. "That's what I think of your so-called service," Harrow growled. "This uniform used to stand for something. Now it's a costume on someone who doesn't even understand what it represents." Lucas remained still, his breathing controlled, steady. But the tension in the courtyard was a living thing now, thick, uncomfortable, electric. And then Lucas moved. Not a twitch, not a flinch, a deliberate, trained turn of the head. precise as a compass needle snapping to true north. He looked Harrow in the eyes, and for the first time spoke. "Sir, I believe we need to have a word." His voice was calm, deep, carried not only across the stones of the palace but into the conscience of everyone listening. Colonel Matthew Harrow, 4th Infantry. Silver Star in Kuwait, 1991. Commendation for Valor in Bosnia, 1997. Your file reads like a legacy of courage. Harrow blinked. Taken off guard, Lucas continued. My father, Staff Sergeant Malcolm Bennett, served under you in Fallujah. He said you were tough, ruthless with discipline, but fair. He told me you saved his life. Twice. The old colonel stiffened. His eyes darted toward the ground, then back to Lucas. My father never forgot that. Said he owed you everything. That's why he hung your photo in our hallway, right next to his flag. Him also said, if I ever wore the uniform, I had to earn it, not demand it. Lucas took a single, respectful step back, returning to parade rest. And I did earn it, sir. Every inch of it. Afghanistan, 2 tours, top honors from Sandhurst, just like you once had. The crowd was utterly silent. A man in a veteran's cap crossed his arms and nodded slowly. A woman whispered, he knows his history better than the old guy. Lucas didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult. He revealed truth, like a soldier pulling back the fog of war. You see me standing here and think it's politics, you think it's diversity, but it's legacy. My grandfather fought in World War II. My great-uncle was buried in Normandy. My bloodline doesn't erase tradition, sir. It built it. You just never saw it. Harrow opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in the entire encounter, he looked not like a colonel, but like a man who just realized he'd missed something vital for a very long time. But Lucas wasn't done. What he said next would reframe the meaning of tradition for everyone watching and shake Harrow's beliefs down to their core. For a long moment, Harrow didn't move. The man who had marched into the courtyard with so much certainty, so much authority, now stood hollow, his spine still straight, but the fire in his eyes was gone. Your father, he finally murmured, his voice quieter now. Malcolm Bennett, I remember him. The name, spoken aloud, seemed to break something open in him. Not anger, not shame, something harder to name. Recognition. He was brave, quiet, always first to volunteer for the worst assignments. He saved 3 of my men when our convoy got hit outside Ramadi. Harrow looked down, his voice trailing off. Never once mentioned a family, a son. Lucas didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence gave space for Harrow to confront something deeper than a military rulebook. The old colonel turned slowly to the crowd. Dozens of faces, young, old, all watching, all waiting, not judging, but listening. We had rules, Harrow said, almost to himself. We had order, structure. We thought we were preserving something important. His voice cracked slightly. But maybe we were just trying to protect ourselves from change. Lucas remained still, a statue again, but now somehow more alive than ever. I told myself that uniform stood for purity, Harrow continued. For lineage, for honor earned through tradition. But maybe it's the honor that matters, not the bloodline. He looked at Lucas again, this time not as a threat, not as an outsider, but as a soldier. I was wrong to speak to you the way I did. That's not what I taught my men. That's not what I stood for. Lucas nodded once, no gloating, just acknowledgement. My grandfather, Lucas said gently, fought in Burma in '44. He saved British officers under heavy fire. He was never thanked, never promoted, just told to go back home and stay quiet. Harrow's shoulders sank. "I've lived a long life believing I knew what tradition meant," he said. "But maybe I've only ever seen one side of it." There was a beat of silence, and then from the crowd a voice rang out. "You're seeing the right side now." It was an older man, white-haired, with a Royal Navy veteran's pin on his jacket. He saluted Lucas, then looked Harrow in the eye. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong, Colonel. Don't stop now." A few others began to nod, some clapped softly, not for drama, for dignity. And Harrow, once the proud symbol of tradition, now looked different. Smaller, perhaps, but freer. He took a step back, then another. Finally, he turned toward Lucas and gave the faintest bow of the head. "I didn't expect to learn anything today," he said. "But I did, thank you." Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need to. His stillness was the answer. His presence, the proof. But one moment still remained. A closing statement. A final word that would not only honor the past, but reshape how everyone present would remember this day forever. The courtyard, once a theater of confrontation, had turned into something else entirely. It had become a classroom, a confession booth, a battlefield of belief, and now a place of transformation. Colonel Harrow stood quietly to the side, arms folded behind his back, no longer the center of attention. His earlier fury had evaporated, replaced by the solemn stillness of a man deeply altered. Tourists who had initially pulled out their phones now lowered them. Their expressions weren't casual anymore. They weren't just visiting history. They were witnessing it. Near the front of the gathering, a boy no older than 12 stepped forward. His skin was the color of caramel, his eyes wide, reflecting both awe and hope. "Sir?" he called out softly. Lucas turned his head, just slightly, enough to acknowledge without breaking protocol. "I want to be like you," the boy said. "Can I do that too?" Lucas's lips curved, barely, a silent, almost imperceptible smile. Behind the boy, his father, clearly moved, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You just saw how it's done, son," he said quietly. "That's what a real soldier looks like." And then it spread. A man in a wheelchair, wearing a Vietnam vet patch, wheeled closer and raised 2 fingers in a formal salute. A young woman with a hijab whispered something in Arabic, placed her hand over her heart, and stepped back respectfully. It wasn't just about Lucas anymore. It was about what he represented, the possibility that tradition didn't need to be erased. It could be reborn, not as an exclusive symbol of the past, but as an inclusive promise for the future. Harrow watched it all quietly. He didn't interrupt, he didn't retreat. He stood among the people he once would have dismissed and simply listened. "Sir," a palace staff member finally said, approaching him respectfully, "we appreciate your service. Would you like to take a seat inside for a moment?" Harrow glanced once more toward Lucas, then back at the crowd. "No," he said softly. "I'll stay. I think I have more to learn today." Meanwhile, a reporter, who had originally come for a fluff piece on tourism, was now scribbling furiously. Her camera operator zoomed in on Lucas's unmoving frame. "Keep rolling," she whispered. "This isn't a photo op. It's a reckoning." And she was right. Because sometimes the opportunity for change doesn't come through speeches or marches. Sometimes it comes in the silence between breaths, in the refusal to be provoked, in the calm, commanding presence of a man who understands that his role is bigger than himself. Lucas represented a new kind of tradition, one born not from bloodlines but from earned respect, one that welcomed those willing to uphold its values no matter where their story began. And standing there, beneath the weight of centuries, Lucas wasn't just guarding a palace anymore. He was guarding a new future. But there was one more moment to come, a final gesture that would shake even the most hardened hearts and mark the end of an era, not with resentment, but with grace. The sun had shifted. Long shadows now stretched across the courtyard, and yet no one moved to leave. Something about what had happened demanded stillness. Respect. Lucas stood like a sentinel, unchanged in posture, but something intangible had transformed, not in his stance, but in what that stance now meant to those around him. He wasn't just a symbol of discipline, he was now a living embodiment of restraint, patience, and unshakable strength, the kind that doesn't need applause to feel complete. Colonel Harrow remained off to the side, sitting on a low stone bench once reserved for tourists and children. His military hat now rested on his knees, his fingers tracing the edges of the regimental pin as if re-evaluating what it truly represented. For decades, he had held tight to the belief that tradition was about preservation, about keeping things exactly as they were. Now, for the first time, he saw that true tradition evolves. The palace staffer quietly brought him a cup of tea. He accepted it with a polite nod, but didn't drink it. His gaze remained fixed on Lucas. "He reminds me of men I served with," Harrow finally said aloud to no one in particular. "The ones who got the worst jobs, but never complained, who bled in silence. I used to think they didn't care about honor, but now I realize they just weren't allowed to wear it out loud." His voice cracked at the end. A man who had once dismissed others as lesser was now confronting the weight of that mindset, and the cost it had inflicted on people he'd never truly seen. Across the square, Lucas remained focused, but his presence carried a new warmth. He hadn't needed to argue, shout, or fight back. His greatest act of resistance had been composure, and in that restraint was rebuke, and in that silence was leadership, and in that stillness was growth. Not just his, but Harrow's as well. Because sometimes change doesn't look like revelation. It looks like quiet surrender. A lowering of the walls built by years of fear disguised as pride. Lucas had cracked open something in Harrow that no seminar, protest, or headline ever could: his humanity. Near the back of the crowd, a young black soldier in uniform stood watching, his expression unreadable except for the gleam in his eye. He whispered to the woman beside him, "That could be me one day." He smiled. "That will be you." Errol heard them. He turned toward the young man and offered a small nod, not of superiority, but of respect. Lucas, though still at post, had become something larger than any one title, a bridge between generations. A living truth that honor isn't inherited, it's earned, and that dignity, when held with humility, has the power to transform even the most hardened heart. As a soft gust of wind rolled across the stones, lifting the corners of flags and jackets, Harrow stood up. He looked one last time at Lucas. Really looked. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "And for the first time in a long time, I think I finally understand why." One final moment remained, a gesture, a choice. A passing of the torch, not in words, but in silence, witnessed by all, and it would be one that no one in that courtyard would ever forget. The courtyard had returned to stillness, but it was no longer the same kind of stillness. It wasn't ceremonial now, it was sacred. Where once there had been tension, now there was reverence. People stood not because they were required to, but because they wanted to, as if rising to meet the weight of the moment. Lucas remained at post, every inch of him composed and steady. But beneath the bearskin cap and scarlet tunic stood a man whose quiet strength had reshaped a centuries-old space without ever lifting a finger. And then something remarkable happened. Colonel Harrow stepped forward once more. His posture was still straight, but now it carried a different energy. Not pride, humility, not entitlement, acknowledgement. He walked slowly, carefully, like a man stepping through memory itself. When he reached Lucas, he didn't speak. Didn't bark orders, didn't reminisce. He simply stopped, and after a beat he saluted. It wasn't performative, it wasn't exaggerated, it was crisp, sharp, and full of meaning. A salute not to a uniform, but to the man wearing it. Lucas, without turning, returned the salute. One measured movement, controlled, respectful, equal. The gesture was electric. It rippled through the onlookers like a current of something larger than tradition. Healing. And for Harrow, that moment wasn't about redemption, it wasn't about apology. It was about recognition, a handing over of something that can't be spoken, only felt, legacy. Behind them, a young woman quietly lowered her phone. Her eyes were wet. "I think we just watched history," she whispered. The child tugged at his dad's sleeve. "Why did that man salute the guard?" The father bent down. "Because he finally saw him." No headline would capture it. No textbook would record it. But those who stood there, young and old, British and foreign, soldier and civilian, would carry it with them. Because in that simple act, tradition wasn't broken, it was reborn. Not diminished by change, but strengthened by inclusion. Lucas remained silent, but his stillness now radiated peace instead of defense, presence instead of protest. The salute had said it all. Nearby, a security officer turned to a staff member and said, "That's the first time I've seen something like that happen here." The staffer nodded. "That's the first time it's ever happened." As Harold turned to leave, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. His shoulders were no longer burdened by the weight of outdated beliefs, but lifted by something lighter. Understanding. Lucas resumed his ceremonial posture, but the air around him had changed. It wasn't just history behind him now, it was future standing with him. And as the tourists slowly dispersed, many of them wiping their eyes or shaking their heads in awe, one thing became clear. Sometimes the most powerful thing a soldier can do is stand still and speak without words. But before we close this chapter, there's one final message, a truth that binds generations of service, and the lesson no parade ground ever teaches. What would you do if someone challenged your worth? In front of a crowd, in silence, in uniform. Imagine for a moment, you're standing in full dress, you've earned your position through years of discipline, service, and sacrifice, and then someone, a man of age and medals, steps into your space. Not to honor you, but to question if you even belong there. Would you defend yourself? Would you shout? Would you walk away? Or would you do what Lucas Bennett did? He didn't speak first. He didn't react with anger or ego. He stood his ground with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from fear, but from character. The kind of stillness you only develop when you know who you are and why you're standing there. That kind of poise, especially in the face of insult, isn't weakness, it's wisdom. If I were in Lucas' shoes, I'd like to believe I could do the same. Not because silence is easy, but because silence in the right moment can speak louder than any shout ever could. The truth is, most of us won't face public prejudice while standing guard at a royal palace, but we will face moments where our dignity is tested. At work, at home, at a family dinner, on social media, in a waiting room. Someone might look at us and say, "You don't belong here." And we'll have to decide, did I shrink? Do I explode? Or do I stand with grace? Lucas showed us the power of standing still until it's time to speak. The life lesson, true strength is measured in restraint. In today's world, we're encouraged to respond quickly, loudly, emotionally. We're told to clap back, to own the other person, to prove ourselves with fire. But sometimes real power is quiet. It doesn't need to raise its voice because it knows its worth. Lucas didn't dishonor the man who dishonored him. He didn't weaponize guilt. Instead, he offered the one thing that's hardest for any of us to offer in moments of injustice: grace. And that grace created room, not just for peace, but for growth. It changed the kernel, it changed the crowd, it changed us. So what's the lesson? You don't always have to fight back to stand tall. Sometimes, just standing is the most courageous thing you can do. Dignity is a quiet force, and it has the power to humble even the proudest hearts. Now, we'd love to hear from you. If you were in Lucas's place, how would you have responded? Would you have spoken sooner, walked away, met words with words, or done just what he did? Waited for the right moment to speak and let the truth carry its own weight? Take a moment, reflect, and let us know in the comments. On a scale from 1 to 10, how powerful was this story for you? 1, I'm still thinking about it. 5, emotional, but I've seen similar stories. One of the most moving stories I've heard this year. There's no wrong answer, just honest reflection. And if this story stirred something in you, even for a second, here's how you can support more stories like this. Click that like button. It lets us know you want more videos with real meaning. Comment below. Your perspective helps others reflect more deeply. Subscribe to Guard Royals. We're on a mission to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and with your help, we can keep shining light on untold stories of courage, tradition, and grace. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that character still matters, that tradition can evolve, and that one man standing tall with dignity can help the world stand taller too. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.